asked you those same three questions. Were you all able to follow my instructions and refrain from discussing this case with anyone since we left yesterday? Yes. Everyone said yes or nodded affirmatively. Were you also able to follow the instructions and refrain from doing any independent research or investigation into this case? Everyone said yes or nodded affirmatively. Did anyone happen to see, hear, or read anything about this case since we left here yesterday? Everyone said no or shook their heads. Thank you. Can we have Dr. Rentschler again, please?
Doctor, I mind you're still under oath.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Jackson, whenever you're ready. Are you ready, Doctor?
I am, yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Rentschler, good morning.
Good morning.
Yesterday, when we last left off, we were discussing materials that you had been provided to review, and you described much of that material in furtherance of your answer that you were asked to review certain data and undertake certain testing as it relates to testing that was done by Aperture, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Did you prepare a PowerPoint presentation to illustrate the analysis and methodology in your review and testing of this case?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you bring that with you today?
I did indeed.
Your Honor, I have a flash drive I'd like to have marked as next in order.
Okay. Is there an objection?
Not for identification.
Okay, so it's marked for identification.
Thank you. KK for ID.
Let me know whenever. Pardon me. Let me know whenever you're ready, Dr. Rentschler.
Sure, you want me to bring up the PowerPoint? Or?
If you could bring up the first slide, let's start with
Sure.
that.
Let's see here. There we go.
Is this representative of the PowerPoint that you presented, or sorry, that you prepared for presentation for the jurors?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay. Are there several blank slides, just sort of placeholder slides as we walk through your analysis that the jurors will see?
There are, yes.
Okay. Let's talk about first of all, what was the purpose of your investigation? What did you seek to undertake?
So the purpose of my investigation in this matter was to evaluate the evidence, and particularly as it pertains to the alleged theory of what occurred in this case.
All right, so I'm going to strike that answer. Ask the question again.
Sure. Did you seek to undertake an analysis of Aperture's testing or part of their testing?
I did, yes, sir.
All right. With regard to that testing, what was the reason that you undertook to analyze Aperture's testing?
Sustained.
Ultimately, were you in receipt of a PowerPoint presentation and a report from Dr. Judson Welcher?
I was, yes, sir.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to review that PowerPoint presentation in whole?
I did, yes.
Were you able to look at his report and read his report and review his report?
I was, yes, sir.
Did you undertake an analysis based on his reporting and his PowerPoint presentation?
So I'm going to see you both at sidebar for just a minute, please.
May I?
Yes.
Did you undertake to review analysis and testing that was done by Aperture as reflected in the PowerPoint that you reviewed, as well as the report that you received?
I did, yes.
Did ARCA, yourself included, undertake testing based on your review of the testing by Aperture?
We did, yes, sir.
Okay. Tell me, what was the biomechanical analysis, that's the second point on your PowerPoint, what was the biomechanical analysis that was undertaken after you reviewed the Aperture reports and Aperture testing? What did you undertake to do?
So I touched on this yesterday a little bit. A biomechanical analysis, there's certain steps that you have to do to actually perform a biomechanical analysis. First of all, you have to determine what the injuries are. What are the diagnosed injuries? Second, you have to determine what happened to the individual. So in this case, what would have happened to Mr. O'Keefe? His kinematics, how would his body move? Was it contacted by anything? Was it contacted by the Lexus? If so, what forces were produced on the arm, on his body? Were they sufficient to cause the injuries that he sustained? And in this case, it's a little more involved. We have, was he hit by the car? What happened after that? Did he somehow move into the yard? And then did something happen in the yard to actually cause the skull fracture? So in order to determine if that's what actually occurred in this case, you have to look at each of those three separate events. And you have to evaluate that from a biomechanical analysis by looking at the force, looking at the kinematics, looking at a human tolerance, and determining or attempting to determine what happened. Now, if you try to determine what happened, not only do you have to prove that that was the case and the facts support that that's what occurred, you also have to eliminate all other possibilities. Because if you're saying this is how it happened, not only do you have to show that that's true.
So next question, and I'm going to strike that. Next question.
Is there an element of differential diagnosis that goes into biomechanical analysis?
There is, absolutely.
Explain that for us, please.
Let me demonstrate. So there are several peer-reviewed articles that I reference.
Is this slide number 2, by the way?
This is slide number 2.
Thank you.
Correct. This is injury reconstruction biomechanical analysis of accidental injury. And that sets forth the methodology that I just described. It's well written about, well reviewed in peer-reviewed articles. This is the method you need. If you're going to opine on biomechanics, this is the method you need to do, the steps you need to go through in order to provide an actual opinion.
And describe that method just a little bit further. Does that include testing?
That includes testing.
Does that include both lab testing and field testing if it's possible?
Absolutely, yes.
Explain that.
In fact, let me explain. Let me get through here. You know, I just had a couple examples here. This third slide, another reference about biomechanical analysis. Again, it's all throughout the literature, very well established how to do this. Now, it's all based on the scientific method, okay? And the scientific method, which you know, it was really established back in the 1620s, but this tells you how to do a proper scientific analysis. So you have an observation, you observe something. So in this case, you might say, all right, there's superficial abrasions to Mr. O'Keefe's arm, and there's a shattered taillight. Are those two things related? Well, the first thing you do is you research the topic area. You look through the literature, you find or look for any examples of that happening. You see if there's any reports or peer-reviewed articles written about this very occurrence. Can you actually demonstrate that if your arm hit the taillight would shatter and cause those abrasions? If this occurs or is a common occurrence, it should be in the literature. You should be able to find information about it. Then you form a hypothesis. Either you say, I think this injury is related to hitting the taillight, or it's not. Whichever one you choose, that's where you then start to go into your experimentation. You have to develop tests to get data to actually back up your hypotheses. So if I said, well, I think the injury is related to it, what would you do? You would go and you would test it. You would get an arm. In this case, we got a hybrid 3 dummy arm, and we got an exemplar vehicle, and we hit the vehicle with the arm. Or we hit the arm with the vehicle, we ran into it, to determine what's going to happen when that occurs. Do we get the right circumstances, the right loading to actually occur in that case? So And then you go back and you analyze that. And if your results don't match up with your hypothesis, you have to reevaluate. You have to go back and see. If we don't get that type of injury, if we don't get the kinematics or the force associated with what we see, you have to reevaluate if your hypothesis or what you think happened is actually true or not. So you have to continuously go through this process. And that's what experts do. That's how you perform an analysis, and that's what's important. You know, I have 3 kids. I have a 9-year-old who's actually.
So I'm going to ask you to wait for the next question.
Okay, sure.
Was there an example that you could use of sort of a real-world example that you might want to use to explain some or part of the scientific method?
There is, yeah, and I would like to explain an example of what's important with that. So I was going to say I have 3 kids, a 9-year-old who's actually turning 10 today. Happy birthday, Kai. And I have 2 older ones.
All right. We're going to stop this. Another example.
Go ahead. Less editorializing.
Minus all the personal.
I'm sorry, Your Honors.
Go ahead.
Details matter, okay? Details in an investigation matter, and details matter here. You need details. You have to explain how things happen, okay? As an expert, I can't come in and just say.
Sustained. It needs to be more question and answer.
Why do details matter?
Because your opinions have to be based on the facts and the evidence.
Why is that?
Because that's what determines your conclusions. I can't come in and say, I think.
Next question.
What if you don't have all the details and facts?
If you don't have details, if you haven't performed a proper analysis, then you can't come to a conclusion that something happened. You can't depend just on your experience. You have to have the analysis, the evidence, and the details to come to a conclusion in a case.
How do you best get details to come to a conclusion in a case?
You need research. You need peer-reviewed articles. You need evidence. You perform testing. You have to demonstrate what you think happened is A, possible, and B, actually did occur. And in order to do that, you need hard evidence to demonstrate that that's what actually occurred in this case.
Do you get that through both lab testing and field testing?
The form. Ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
Can you get that in lab testing?
Absolutely.
Can you get that in field testing?
You can get that in field testing as well, yes.
Are those integral to an analysis?
They are. If you don't have any other evidence, if you don't have research, if you don't have peer-reviewed articles showing or demonstrating what happens, you have to formulate, you have to get that evidence. And the way to do that is through field testing, if you have no other evidence and no other source of information to provide that type of evidence.
Let's go to the next slide. Did you undertake, and this is a placeholder, did
Yes.
you undertake the scientific method in this case?
I did, yes.
What was the hypothesis of the incident that you utilized in furthering your analysis?
So the first step, the first part of this event is contact between Mr. O'Keefe's arm and the vehicle.
Could you describe for the jurors what hypothesis you used based on your review of the information you got from Aperture?
Sure. So the hypothesis that I looked at, Aperture, their testing and report indicates that Mr. O'Keefe had his arm out at a 90-degree angle.
Sustained.
What do you see? By the way, where are these from, these 2 slides?
These 2 slides are from the PowerPoint presentation that Aperture provided.
All right, so you didn't create these?
I did not, no, sir.
Describe the angle of the arm in the left photograph with the drinking glass in the hand.
So the angle of that arm is approximately 90 degrees. The other photographs in the PowerPoint demonstrate that for someone the same height as Mr. O'Keefe, the arm would be at about 90 degrees with an individual standing erect. That's what was demonstrated in their PowerPoint.
Do you note anything in their PowerPoint, the Aperture PowerPoint, related to the clothing worn in that left photograph?
Yes, they have the surrogates wearing a hoodie or a sweatshirt, which is the exact same type and brand that Mr. O'Keefe was found wearing at the time of the incident.
Did that play a part in your overall analysis, the fact that the individual, the surrogate, as you use the name, was adorned with the same type of sweatshirt that was found on Mr. O'Keefe?
It did, yes. I mean, that's one of the details that we have to look at. Details matter, so we look at the clothing that was worn and the evidence found with respect to that actual sweatshirt.
I'd like to stay with that for a second. Why is that important? Why would the clothing matter?
Well, because that tells us, that gives us evidence of what may or may not have occurred. Mr. O'Keefe was wearing this sweatshirt when the time of this alleged incident occurred. So if there is contact between his sweatshirt and that rear vehicle, the taillight from the Lexus, there would likely be evidence of that. And we have to look at that sweatshirt to see the condition of that sweatshirt, if there's evidence on that sweatshirt, and be able to pair that or match that up to what happened on the vehicle.
Is that part of a normal biomechanical analysis to evaluate clothing of the body as well?
Absolutely, especially when you look at automobile pedestrian impacts.
Why?
Because the clothing tells you, or can tell you, how the impact occurred, where contact occurred between an individual and the vehicle, what part of the vehicle, what part of the individual. So it either may or it may not, but it can give you very important clues about what may have occurred during the incident.
Is that part of the normal methodology that's utilized in the field of biomechanical analysis, especially as it relates to pedestrian motor vehicle incidents?
It absolutely is, yes. Look at the damage to the clothing. Look if you compare it up to the vehicle, to the ground, to other sources. It's another tool, another detail, and part of the evidence that allows you to try and determine what occurred.
Do you have experience in reviewing clothing of individuals that may have been involved in vehicle pedestrian incidents?
I do, yes.
How often has that played a part in your biomechanical analysis and the methodology that you employ?
It happens quite often when we look at automobile pedestrian impacts. That's really one of the steps that you need to do. You need to look at the clothing, you need to look at that evidence and see if that matches up with any other evidence in the case.
Would it be a proper methodology to just ignore the clothing in a vehicle pedestrian incident?
It would be, yes. I mean, it's really one of the first things you should do.
I'm sorry, my question was, would it be proper if you just wholly ignored it?
No, it would be improper. It would not be proper. It would be improper if you just ignored it.
Getting back to the slide at hand, and we're on slide, just to stay coordinated, is this slide 7?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. You've talked about the left photograph. What is the right, the short video?
So this short video is what I refer to as the paint transfer test that was performed by Aperture. And what they did was take a surrogate the same approximate height and weight as Mr. O'Keefe and had him stand behind a subject, an exemplar Lexus, the same year, make, and model. And they put paint on the rear taillight cover on the fender, and then they backed it in to the surrogate's arm. And the reason for this is they attempted to show that where the paint contacts the arm, that it's the same area where the superficial abrasions were on Mr. O'Keefe's arm.
Did you utilize these photographs and videos from the Aperture report in conducting and building the field testing and or the lab testing that you ultimately undertook?
I did, yes, sir.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What's depicted in this slide?
So this is from the Aperture report, and the third conclusion is that the location and orientation of the lacerations on John O'Keefe's right forearm and arm are consistent with the geometry and the orientation of the right taillight on the Reed 2021 Lexus LX57.
How did you interpret the phrase geometry?
To me, geometry just means shape. So the way I interpreted this is the one test that was performed with respect to the taillight. This is the only test I saw that Aperture performed involving the taillight and the arm, is that with this paint transfer test, they concluded that, again, the area where the paint was transferred onto the arm is consistent, the same shape and orientation as apparently the lacerations found on Mr. O'Keefe's forearm.
Did this test, in your opinion, establish force multipliers that were exerted on the taillight?
It has nothing to do with force. It doesn't describe the force exerted on the taillight or on the arm. It doesn't describe how the arm would have moved as it hit the taillight. It doesn't describe how the taillight would fracture. It doesn't describe how you would actually get the lacerations on the arm. Again, all this does is generally, and I made an error there. This report, and you can see the slide says laceration. Mr. O'Keefe did not have lacerations on his arm.
What did he have?
He was diagnosed with superficial abrasions.
Is there a difference between a laceration and an abrasion?
There's a distinct difference, both biomechanically and medically, yes.
Is that an important distinction?
That is.
Why?
The first step of the biomechanical analysis is identify the injuries, and you have to take the diagnosed injuries identified by a medical doctor. So it's superficial abrasions. To put lacerations on, that's simply incorrect.
Objection. Strike.
So I strike the end of that.
Would you describe the injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's arm as lacerations?
No.
Would they be more properly described in another way?
It would be, yes.
What's that other way?
So they've been diagnosed as superficial abrasions. An abrasion occurs when there's rubbing or scraping of the skin, and it just rubs away the top layer, the epidermis of the skin. Now, a laceration is a jagged ripping or tearing of the skin, which gets down through the epidermis into the dermis. So abrasions take much less force. They're less severe than what a laceration actually is.
In a biomechanical analysis, if it's done properly, is it is it important to get the proper injury to the body as a foundation to the entire analysis?
That's core to the analysis, because you're trying to determine how an injury occurred. You have to know what that injury is. You have to have the correct injury to be able to evaluate it.
Let's go to the next slide. Bless you. This is a placeholder. I want to ask you a little bit while this is up. We can turn the lights up. First step in the analysis. What is the first step of the analysis after you determine the injuries, the type of injury?
So in this step, after you determine the injury, what we want to do is we want to look at the physical evidence. So we have the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's arm, and we have the sweatshirt that he was wearing at the time. So the first step in any investigation is to determine, does the evidence from the arm match up to the evidence on the sweatshirt?
Did you undertake that analysis?
I did, yes.
Is that indicated in a slide a little bit later on in your PowerPoint?
It is, yes, sir.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide, please. What are we looking at in this slide?
So this explains the injuries, and this is from on the left side, that is the diagnoses from the autopsy. The right side is from the hospital. And you can see it says blunt impact injuries of head and extremities, abrasions, and lacerations. The laceration is on the back of the skull, on the back of the head where the occipital skull fracture is. When you look at the extremities, everywhere where it talks about the extremities, it's superficial abrasions. So the first step in a biomechanical analysis, you review the medical records, determine exactly what the injuries are. And you can see there's a picture of the actual abrasions. Those are the documented injuries or abrasions to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
Are these acceptable sources? Well, let me ask you this. What are the sources that are reflected on this slide that you referred to or you relied on in coming to your opinions and conclusions regarding Mr. O'Keefe's injuries to his right arm?
Again, on the left side is from the autopsy report from the medical examiner, and then the right side is actually from the Good Samaritan hospital where Mr. O'Keefe was taken.
Are autopsy records, hospital records, medical records acceptable sources for a biomechanist to rely on in determining or coming to opinions and conclusions?
They are. They are the sources you go to determine what the injuries are, yes.
Did you see... you reviewed the entirety of the medical records as well as the entirety of the medical examiner's file, is that right?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you see reference to any fractures that were noted on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, either his arm, his forearm, or his hand?
No, there were no diagnosed or references to fractures on any part of his right arm or hand.
I'm going to ask Mr. Wolk to display a couple of exhibits the x-rays.
Okay?
So he's going to take over the TV screen.
Sure.
If that's okay, Your Honor?
Yes.
This is an exhibit that was marked yesterday. I want to say 226. I may be wrong, Your Honor. I'll get the right nomenclature in just a second. This is one of the exhibits, one of 3 exhibits that was introduced yesterday. Do you recognize what's depicted on this?
That's the X-ray of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand taken January 31st, I believe.
Did you review this in furtherance of your analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
Was it part of the medical record, medical records or ladies' records?
It was. A series of the X-rays, yes, was attached. It was part of the medical records that were provided to me and that I reviewed in this matter.
Thank you. Just for the record, so I can clarify, this is Exhibit 229A, as in apple. Do you see, have you looked at X-rays before?
I have, yes.
Have you interpreted X-rays in furtherance of your analyses in years past?
I have during my biomechanical analysis, yes.
Are you trained to look at X-rays and determine whether there are fractures, hairline fractures, broken bones, things of that nature?
I've been doing this for 20 years. In graduate school, I worked with surgeons and doctors to look at X-rays.
Is that part of the normal methodology that biomechanists undertake in furtherance of injury analysis?
It is part of what we normally do, yes, sir.
Would it be an important part of a biomechanist's ultimate analysis and conclusions as it relates to an injury analysis?
It would be, and especially in this case, if we're talking about impact to the arm and the hand, very important to determine, as I said, not only what the actual injuries are, but what injuries did not occur.
Would it be appropriate to come to any opinions and conclusions in an injury analysis if you were to ignore X-rays, if they existed?
No. If X-rays exist, you need to review them. You need to determine what they represent and what injuries either did or didn't occur. You absolutely need to look at them.
Do you see any injuries represented or any defects represented in this X-ray of Mr. O'Keefe's right hand?
I do not, no, sir.
Can you describe what you do see or what you would expect to see if there were injuries, broken bones, torn ligaments, things of that nature, swelling? What would you expect to see?
You could actually see the fracture lines on the bones. They are evident along the hands or along the ulna and the radius. Any dislocations you see, there would be a difference in the space at the joints between the bones. Dislocation, then there would be increased space or even a decreased space if there's compression of the joints, the interphalangeal joints, the metacarpophalangeal joints, the wrist joint. There's no indication on these X-rays of any fractures or any trauma or any type of injury to the bones or the joints.
Can we go to 229B as in Bravo with the court's permission?
Yes.
You see what's depicted in this photograph?
I can, yes, sir.
What is this?
So this is a X-ray. The forearm shows the ulna and the radius, which are the 2 bones in the forearm.
Do you see any defects, injury, trauma to these bones or anything associated with those bones?
I do not. And when you're viewing this on the software to look at the X-rays, you can actually adjust the contrast. So you can adjust the brightness and the darkness, and it allows you to go through the whole range to better evaluate whether there are any fractures. This is a little bright, so when you're looking at this, you would actually decrease the contrast a little bit.
In terms of your review of this particular photograph, what did you note in terms of trauma or injuries at all?
I did not note any indication or any signs of trauma or injury to the forearm or to the wrist in this case.
If we could go to 229C as in Charlie, what are we looking at in this photograph?
This is the right humerus, the right upper bone of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm.
Do you notice, or did you note, did you review this in furtherance of your analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
Did you note any defects, trauma, injuries at all with regard to the bone is the
humerus.
The humerus?
I did not, no, sir.
What about the joints associated with the humerus, top or bottom?
I did not note any injuries or damage to either the elbow or the shoulder joint either.
What is your opinion in conclusion, having reviewed all three of these x-rays, with regard to the condition of Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, starting from the arm, the forearm, and the bones in the hand?
There's no indication of any type of acute injury from the x-ray to Mr. O'Keefe's right arm, either his hand, his forearm, or his upper arm.
Thank you. We can switch that back. And if we can go back to your PowerPoint. Can we go to the next slide, please?
Maybe. Let me see if I can start back in on it here. Okay, there we go.
What are we looking at in this slide?
So again, this is the hoodie or sweatshirt that Mr. O'Keefe had on at the time of this alleged incident.
Did you consider these photographs in conducting your injury causation analysis?
I did, yes, sir.
What role did these photographs of Mr. O'Keefe's hoodie play in your injury causation analysis?
So this shows the hoodie, and it was inspected by the police department, and it was noted, as you can see on the right sleeve by the triangles, there were 9 different punctures or holes noted in the sleeve of the sweatshirt.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What are we looking at in these series of photos?
So let's come to sidebar for a minute and Mr. Jackson, bring your PowerPoint, please. Jurors, I apologize that took so long, but it was necessary to do rather than sending you out, so. Sure. Thank you. Tori, can you give me a couple of these?
One moment.
Okay.
Dr. Winchler, my eyes aren't good enough to see the upper right-hand corner. What slide number is this? That's
Number
on-
12.
Number 12, thank you. Did you look at these photographs and consider these photographs in furtherance of your ultimate conclusion?
I did, yes, sir.
Can we move to slide 13, please? Did you also look at and consider these photographs in coming to your ultimate conclusion?
I did, yes.
Can we move to slide 14, please? Did you look at and consider these photographs in coming to your conclusions and opinions
I
regarding
did.
this case?
Yes, sir.
Can you move from slide 14 over to slide 18, please?
Can I switch through real quick?
Sure.
Yep. So we 18.
Let's go to 18. What are we looking at in slide 18?
So this is Mr. O'Keefe's right arm at autopsy, and they're holding up a ruler to demonstrate the size and dimensions of the abrasions.
And what are the yellow indicators?
Those are indicators I added based on the length of the ruler to show the approximate size, length, and width of those abrasions.
Was it important in your biomechanical analysis to measure and denote all the injuries?
It was, yes.
Did you actually count the number of injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's arm?
I did, yes.
How many injuries did he have? How many distinct and separate injuries did Mr. O'Keefe's arm present?
Conservatively, I counted 36 different superficial abrasions on his right arm.
And did you go through all the photographs in an effort to count and distinguish one abrasion and one defect on his skin from another?
I did, yes, sir.
And you said conservatively 36 separate abrasions, correct?
That's correct.
What does that mean in terms of the mechanism that you would expect to cause that abrasion?
Well, you need 36 different points of contact with to get through the sweatshirt and get to the skin to actually cause abrasion to the skin. 36 different separate points of contact to the skin.
How many defects, remind us, how many defects were noted by the crime lab in Mr. O'Keefe's right sleeve?
9 defects.
Can you scroll to slide 22 quickly, please? What is this?
This is a slide, again, from Aperture, from their PowerPoint. It's the only slide, the only photo, the only indication of the hoodie that I found in their analysis. And it also has pictures showing, looks like they try to line up the top of that taillight cover.
Sustained.
Do you see there's some sort of marking on that lower left photograph with some yellow lines?
I do, yes.
How did you analyze that marking?
I analyzed that. It goes through the part of the taillight cover and then goes through part of the upper arm of the surrogate.
And there's a parallel line to it a little bit in a V shape. There's a parallel line below it. How did you analyze that line?
I analyzed that as apparently showing that the area of the taillight.
So not apparently. What did you
How did you
analyze?
interpret
sure.
that?
I interpreted that represents that area of the taillight corresponds to the area of the upper arm.
And there's a red dotted line around the tail light, correct?
Correct.
How did you interpret what that represents?
That was the part of the taillight that fractured.
Did you put any of these lines on there, or are these all from Aperture?
These are all from Aperture. I did not put any of those on there.
You see the small, it's horizontal, I'm sorry, it's vertical photograph of Mr. O'Keefe's arm?
I do, yes.
Did you note anywhere in the Aperture report a denotation of the number of abrasions, counting the number of abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's arm?
There's no denotation, no indication that the number of abrasions were ever counted. No, sir.
Ultimately, based on your review of and all of your testing, did you come to an opinion or a conclusion as to whether or not the abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's arm are consistent with striking the right rear taillight of the Lexus?
I did, yes.
And what is that conclusion?
That they're inconsistent with striking the taillight or being produced as a result of contact with the taillight.
Why did you come to that conclusion?
There's a number of reasons that I came to. First of all, the abrasions, the numbers don't correspond to the number of holes or...
Sustained.
Did you consider, without counting the number of abrasions and the number of holes, did you consider the abrasions?
I did, yes.
Did you consider the sweatshirt?
I did.
Was that an important part of your analysis?
It was, yes.
What else did you consider?
I considered that it was not possible to line up 36 different abrasions with
So I'm going to strike that answer, ask it differently.
Your Honor, if he could finish his answer. He was about to say contact with the taillight.
Yep, so ask it differently, Mr. Jackson.
Sure. What did the 36 abrasions, conservatively, and their interaction with the taillight have to do with your ultimate opinion and conclusion?
Well, that you have to, if those abrasions came from contact with the taillight, you have to be able to correlate them and line them up with contact, 36 different contacts from the taillight.
And ultimately, based on your understanding of Aperture's review and the photographs that you saw, you were presuming, based on Aperture's testing, that Mr. O'Keefe was wearing that hoodie. Is that correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
What was the condition? Let me ask it this way. There's a photograph in the Aperture report that we're looking at with blue paint on an arm, right?
Correct.
Is that your understanding, or did you test that Mr. O'Keefe could have been hit wearing short sleeves?
No.
What did you test? What was your presumption and assumption in your testing?
That he was wearing the hoodie that was found on him at the time,
With the 9 holes in the right sleeve.
with the 9 holes in the right sleeve.
Watch the form of the question, Mr. Jackson.
Sure. Let's go to the next slide, please. What is this?
These are the top two and bottom right slide are from the Aperture PowerPoint.
How did you interpret the two photographs on the right, the parallel lines and the red lines in that slide?
The parallel lines correspond to an area of the fractured tail light, and then the red dotted line corresponds to an area of abrasions on Mr. O'Keefe's upper arm, and there's a red arrow pointing to part of the fractured tail light.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What are we looking at in this slide?
Again, this is the paint test. This is the only test that was conducted by Aperture to look at the tail light and the arm in this case, and the interaction between the two.
Did you note whether in all of Aperture's data that you reviewed, whether or not there was any measurements to determine whether the abrasions were consistent with contact with the Lexus?
I did. There were no measurements at all taken with respect to that test. No measurements with respect to where the contact happened on the car or on the arm itself. There was no indication of where that blue paint extended on the surrogate's arm, say from the wrist up to where the laceration or the abrasions would have occurred.
Is that important?
That's very important.
Why?
Because you can't say that the area where the blue paint is corresponds to the area of the abrasions if you don't take measurements. If you just eyeball it, all you can say is by eyeballing it, it looks approximately the same. but that's not scientific. You can't come to an actual conclusion that where that paint covers the arm is where those abrasions actually were. They could lie outside, they could lie forward, they could lie above that painted area. You can't say with any scientific certainty that that area of paint corresponds to where the abrasions are.
In this motion video and the still photograph to the left in slide 24, is that what we're on, 24?
We are, yes, sir.
What did you note with regard to the positioning of the surrogate's arm? I think that's Mr. Welcher. As it relates to the taillight and the back of the SUV.
Yes, the positioning of the arm in the photographs as well as the one test that was performed, the arm is approximately 90 degrees, level in line with the rear taillight of the vehicle.
Did you seek to do any testing approximating the positioning of the arm as you saw it, as you interpreted it in the aperture data?
I did, yes, sir.
What were you seeking to determine when you did your testing?
Well, if we want to determine whether the orientation and the position of the abrasions on the arm correspond to the tail light, you have to have the arm in the position that you claim it struck the tail light and then look at the abrasions. Because if you're looking at orientation and the direction of the abrasions, you can't look at how they exist with the arm. The only pictures of the arm of the abrasions are with Mr. O'Keefe's arm extended. But that's not how he would have had it according to the test. It would have been at a 90-degree angle.
Dr. Rentschler, were there any peer-reviewed articles cited in connection with Aperture's paint transfer test?
I did not see, I was not provided a single peer-reviewed article with respect to the paint test or any indication of any test or article looking at arm contact with a vehicle or a taillight cover.
Can we go to slide 25? What are we looking at in this slide?
So in this slide, the picture on the far left is the photographs provided from the autopsy in hospital with Mr. O'Keefe's right arm fully extended. Again, those are the only photographs we have.
What about the photograph in the middle and to the far right?
In the middle and the far right, what I did was actually take that arm and then rotate the forearm to put it in a position that it would be in as demonstrated by the paint test with the arm at approximately 90 degrees.
What was the import of this undertaking?
Well, if you look at the paint test and the way the arm's at 90 degrees and having the car come and essentially contact and push the arm out of the way, that's going to give you or tell you the directionality or the direction of the abrasions. Because if you have your arm at a right angle and the vehicle comes and pushes and slides against it on that forearm, you would expect those abrasions to be horizontal, to be in line with that forearm.
Are they?
They're not. You can see some of them are vertical, some of them are angled, some of them it's hard to tell what the directionality is. But if your arm, again, is being struck and pushed this way, as it's pushed and as the car goes by, if this would occur in this manner, you would expect those abrasions to be horizontal in the direction that the vehicle is actually traveling.
When you say horizontal, do you mean horizontal from the elbow to the wrist?
Correct, or parallel, yes, with the forearm.
Can we go to slide 26, please? This is yet again the same video that we saw earlier.
That is correct. This is the paint test video, yes.
And what has to happen in order for the paint in this test to reach the upper forearm?
Well, in this case, to reach the upper forearm, there has to be contact between the forearm and the taillight cover.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What is this slide showing?
Again, this shows, you can see on the right, I added arrows to kind of show the directionality of the different abrasions. And on the forearm, they simply do not line up with the type of kinematics or the type of motion shown in the paint test. Again, of the arm getting pushed out of the way and the car traveling past. If there were going to be abrasions from the fractured glass as it moves along, again, it would be lengthwise parallel to the forearm.
If the arm was positioned as it was indicated in the paint test done by Aperture, would you expect to see this pattern of injuries on Mr. O'Keefe's arm if, in fact, it contacted the taillight and if, in fact, it was abraded based on the taillight?
You would not. You can't get, for instance, horizontal abrasions on the upper arm and somehow get vertical and angled abrasions on the forearm. The kinematics don't work out to actually produce those types of injuries.
Can we go to the next slide, please? What are we looking at in this slide?
So again, this is the paint transfer test, and it demonstrates there were no measurements taken, so we don't know the exact size or location of that paint or of the lacerations. And you can see the photograph on the right basically shows that after doing the test, a picture of the right arm was put next to it and basically eyeballed to say it's the same, well, it's only approximately the same area.
So I'm going to strike that. So next question.
Do you see any measurements, any tape measures, any laser measuring equipment, anything like that in that right photograph?
Nothing, no types of measurements whatsoever.
Can we go to the next slide, please? This is, on the left, the same video that we've seen several times, correct?
That's correct.
What are we looking at on the photograph on the right?
So on the right, it is the video of this test taken from the side of the vehicle.
Did you notice anything of note in this angle of the paint transfer test?
I did. I slowed this video down, and so as you can see, as it starts out, and you'll see the vehicle starts to slowly back. So there was no photographs showing the position of the arm in the back of the car. The video is from the side, and the top video, you can't tell where the arm is positioned against the tailgate. But whatever positions it's at, you can see as the car backs up here, look at the elbow and the upper arm. If the car backed directly in this direction, there would be no contact with that elbow or the upper arm. And remember, this test is to show where the paint would transfer and if that correlates to the lacerations.
You mean, before you start the video, when you say there would be no contact with the elbow or the upper arm, you mean the biceps area and from the elbow up?
That's correct.
Is that based on the photograph on the right and the positioning of the surrogate?
Exactly. You can see right now, if the car just backed directly straight back, it would not contact the elbow or the upper arm.
Before you play the video, what did you note when the car from the angle to the right of the video on the right? What did you note as the car, just before the car starts to make contact with the surrogate? What did you note?
So in order to get that pattern on the arm, right as the car contacts the arm, the surrogate pushes his elbow forward, leans into the car against the light, and then rolls off.
Can you play that for us, please? Did you see what you were describing in that video?
I did, and I can slow it down. So you can see, even at this point, as the car approaches, it would not contact the elbow or the biceps. So as it comes in, watch the elbow all of a sudden shoot in. Surrogate turns his arm in and then leans against the light cover. So this is not indicative of someone standing there and having a car back into their arm. In order to get that pattern of paint on the arm, someone would have to stand there, and as the car approached and contacted their arm, they would have to actually push their arm forward and lean into it to get that paint pattern.
Is that, in your view, proper scientific testing?
Sustained.
Let's move to the next slide, please. What is this?
And so this is that same event, and you can see I slowed it down even more just so you can see the actual movement of the elbow and the upper arm to get that pattern.
Thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? This is slide 30. And let's go to 31.
Yeah, this is 31.
I'm sorry, 31. what conclusions or opinions did you reach or could you reach after reviewing the totality of the results of the paint transfer test?
The paint transfer test, all it can show is the approximate area, of where the arm was covered in paint as the surrogate jammed his elbow in and rolled against the taillight cover. So it tells us nothing.